Porodica King se već više od 100 godina bori za ljudska prava u Sjedinjenim Američkim Državama. Jedan njihov član je dao svoj život za domovinu. U aprilu 1968. dr. Martin Lutheru King dao je svoj život za budućnost Sjedinjenih Američkih Država. Međutim, danas, više od 50 godina nakon tog događaja, imamo identične probleme i identične situacije. Ovog puta nije dr. King, ali je George Floyd. Sa mnom iz Atlante u Georgiji je sin dr. Martina Luthera Kinga, Martin Luther King III. Mr. King, welcome to program N1.
Thank you. I'm honored to share today.
I said in my introductory note that your family is fighting for the rights and human rights in United States for more than 100 years. Your late grandfather, Martin Luther King Sr., started that. Then it went to your father, late Dr. Martin Luther King. Then it went to you, but also it goes further to your daughter, Yolanda. She's going to be the next generation of kings fighting for the rights and freedoms in the United States. But today we are having, again, one black man, African American, killed on the streets of the United States. This time is not Martin, it's George. But the story is almost similar because those want to have a better rights, better future. What is the state of the United States today?
Well, I would have to say that we are in a state of great trauma. As you so aptly stated, once again, we have seen an African-American man, more graphically this time, murdered by a police officer, by the police officer taking his knee and putting it on this African-American man, George Floyd's neck. And Mr. Floyd was asking for relief, to no avail. The policeman treated him less than you would an animal that you were shooting down. He did not treat him with humanity and with respect and with dignity. For us to see this, and I might add a little context, in the last 2 months, we've seen a death of an African-American man here in my own state of Georgia, Brunswick, Georgia, where 2 white men chased him in a pickup truck and then killed him because they thought he was a burglar, they said. And then just 2 weeks ago, in the state of Louisville, Kentucky, officers broke in the home of Breonna Taylor, an African-American woman, and she and her boyfriend were in bed together, and they shot up the home and killed Breonna Taylor. It was the wrong house that they were breaking into. And then, of course, just a week or so ago, 7 days or so ago, George Floyd was killed on the streets. The policeman performed as judge, jury, and executioner because Mr. Floyd lost his life unnecessarily. What it did was it was the tipping point so that a huge amount of frustration would occur in the United States. Some of it would result in violence. There are now over 130 cities that have protested in the United States. And of course, we know of cities around the world, from London to Ireland to India to Australia to South America, almost every continent, there are people demonstrating because of this tragic incident that caused people in the United States to mobilize and people all over the world to say, enough is enough. I will finally add, my father over 50 years ago was in Memphis, Tennessee. And the men who he was demonstrating with had signs that said, I am a man. Treat me with dignity and respect and like I'm a human being. 50 plus years later, Black people and white people and Latino and Hispanic people and others have signs that say Black Lives Matter. Treat us with dignity and respect, and as we are human beings. It feels like police departments have lost their, some of them, I won't say all because it's not all, have lost their humanity. In fact, many of the police departments through these demonstrations have taken a knee out of respect to say, we understand.
Before I draw a connection between words of your late father, Dr. King, and even today, let me ask you this, and this is just a recent data from Minneapolis. It says that the neck restraints since 2012, the number is 428. 14% of those lost consciousness. At least 2/3 of those who have been neck restrained in Minneapolis, in Minnesota, are Blacks or African Americans, and they are 19% of the population of that city. Are those bad police officers about whom you just spoke?
So yeah, I would say that the police department needs to be investigated, because yes, there are, it's really called racism. It's called profiling. They are targeting African Americans because with a population of 19%, but yet 2/3 of the cases are Black people or African Americans. It's clear that Black people are being targeted. Does that mean the police officers are racist? It means they are trained in a racist system and they are operating because the system itself must be transformed. When the system is transformed, then the police officers will be transformed. That's the whole institution. So I don't want to just call them racist, but they're operating in a system that promotes racist policies, yes.
Let me ask you something else, which is close to your family, close to yourself. The St. John's Church in Washington, D.C., a historic monument, place where your father preached and prayed, and many presidents have come there to pray and ask for solace or for guidance for God to make decisions, from Madison through Lincoln to Donald Trump. But this week, we saw something what was unbelievable. Clergy, people, everybody was thrown out of churchyard, and churchyard become a battleground. And the president propped up a Bible in his hand as a piece of object or prop for his own agenda. How you judge that?
Well, I'm greatly disappointed in the lack of moral leadership from the President of the United States and many others. I'm not the only one. Even some of his supporters have come out and said that at this time he needed to be talking about a message of calming the people down. First of all, it was unconscionable that nonviolent protesters would be removed from the site of the church by using force and pepper spray and tear gas and rubber bullets. Not violent protesters, nonviolent. That's the objective, that people were protesting with their First Amendment rights to protest peacefully. And because the president wanted to create a photo op so he could stand in front of a church and hold a Bible, that was certainly that's beyond understandable. I don't understand this president. I do not understand how he operates other than from his own instinctive points of view that seem to provide the wrong instincts. A president is supposed to lead his nation, or if it was a female, her nation. That is the job of the president, to bring the people together, not to divide the president. This president consistently creates division, divisiveness, and creates hostility and hatred. And then to say that he was going to take the American military and use it against Americans. I just don't know how to filter that. I think the American people, and I hope that his supporters and I hope that his advisors will get him to understand that that is not the right move for him to be calling for. Yes, it is. You should be calling for calmness, and law enforcement has to be used to help execute that. But you don't need to be calling for the United States military. Their job is to protect the nation's borders. And if there is a conflict, they have to be engaged in fighting. But it never was designed to have to come and fight Americans. I don't know what this man is thinking about. I'm not sure who and where he's getting his advice from, but it certainly is not responsible advice. And it is not constructive, it is destructive.
Before I ask you about some other US presidents, some recent and some not so recent, let me read you something what he wrote on a Twitter today while we are speaking. It says, I quote him, "In 3.5 years, I've done much more for our Black population than Joe Biden has done in 43 years. Actually, he set them back big time with his crime bill, which he doesn't even remember. I've done more for the Black American in fact, that any president in the US history, with the possible exception of another Republican, late great Abraham Lincoln. And it's not even close. The Democrats know this, and so does the fake news, but they refuse to write or say it because they are inherently corrupt." Have you ever heard anything like this, and do you have any comment on this?
Yeah, my comment would be that just because he says it does not make it true. In fact, most of what he says and has said, it has been documented that he has told by now probably 15,000 lies to the American people. So just because he says it does not make it right. He is running for office, and for those who want to feel good, they'll believe that he has done this. Even some Black people will. But that certainly does not make it true. I think that there may be some things that he's done, but I'm not sure we need to get into comparing who's done this, who's done that. He's running a political campaign. So, that's fodder for politics. But if you check out the record is not accurate. You even have some one or two of his Black supporters saying they support him because he's done more for the Black community than anyone. I think that he has been an equal opportunity divider. And yes, there was a decent economy before the pandemic. But what happens is all the good that you're doing, it's almost like my mom used to talk about, you fill up a bucket of milk, a cow, you're milking a cow, and then you kick it over. So the good that you did is not seen. And so he has to say that he's done all this stuff because he's constantly kicking over things. He may do some good, but then he does things that are, very, very bad. For example, if you look at the appointments of those to the courts, all of these judges that are being appointed, and it's not just him, it's the Republican. I don't like to be partisan, but I have to be truthful. It is the Republican members of Congress, of the United States Senate, who are confirming a lot of judges who are not even qualified. They're extremely conservative in their points of views, but they're not qualified to sit on those benches, but they are very, very conservative. And so they appoint these unqualified people because there's a judicial group of people who recommend judges, and they give all of those judges marks as to whether or not they should move up or not. And most of them have not achieved the marks by a group of legal people, not me, legal experts who say whether these people are qualified or not. But he keeps signing laws so that these judges can be approved after the Republicans have brought them to the table. So I think that that's problematic. That's one thing that's problematic. There are many other things that are problematic about what the president has done. And I think you have to, the world community you have to interface with. We are not an island. We are a very big country, a very wealthy country, but we have to work with others in the world. And unfortunately, much of the rhetoric that the president espouses creates hostility as opposed to friendship. We've got to find ways to build friends around the world so that we all can exist and make the world a better place for all of God's children.
When we compare the previous presidents, LBJ and Nixon, with President Trump, they look much better than before, because all what they did, they had their own mistakes, and they have their good things, and they have riots, and they have problems and everything. And leadership in the United States now looks much worse, with the people in Congress, with the people in Senate, and with the people in the White House. And we know that the President LBJ, for example, run a lot of good things through the Senate and Congress in his time when he was working with your father. So can we compare America of that time with America of this time?
I think what I would have to say is, during my father's era, there were more civil rights gains that President Kennedy and President Johnson signed. So President Johnson, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, fair housing legislation, all that occurred under him. So there was more civil rights legislation passed and put on the books under President Johnson than really any president. I think President Nixon was a part of creating affirmative action and some other things that were beneficial as well. I think that historians will have to be the judge of this president, President Trump. I can talk about personally what I believe right this moment, but I think history will be the judge. And I'm not sure that history will judge President Trump favorable because his mode of operation has always been, I win when I can divide, when I can be a divisive force. He does not believe that as a unifying force, he can be a winner. And unfortunately, when everything is always focused on self and not on what is in the best interest of the nation, what is in the best interest of the community, what is in the best interest of the people, then history is going to have to judge you by your acts. And as I said, I'm not considered a historian, but I would say that I'm not sure that history is going to judge. And I don't know that he even cares about that. The only thing he cares about, it feels like, is winning. I wish that he had or displayed that he really cares about the American people. There are times when he may say that, but then the actions do not line up with the words. So, I have to hope and pray and continue to pray for this president. Pray that something is touched in the depths of his heart and soul that will cause a level of change. I don't expect it, but I will never give up. And the final thing is that I want to be a part of encouraging people to mobilize, to organize, to plan, to strategize, to register, and to vote in this upcoming election and elections throughout.
We have seen a lot of things during United States history, and we saw the first African-American president, Mr. Obama. Can we see at least another vice president of the United States coming from African-American community in this time, during this fight?
Of course, we can. I don't know what factors Vice President Biden is using, but I do know that there are several Black candidates the person that he's looking at to be on his ticket. And perhaps if he chooses an African-American woman, he said he's going to choose a woman. So whether it's an African-American woman or not, we don't know. I don't know that. I think that there's a good chance that he will choose an African-American woman. And I think there's at least there's a good chance that he can actually be successful and win, so that you would have an African-American who is the vice president. I don't think that's out of the realm of reality at this point.
Before I conclude this interview with something what your late father said, and before I ask you something about future, let me draw you to Bosnia and Herzegovina. Several years ago, you have visited city of Tuzla to open memorial bust of your father. How you remember Bosnia and Herzegovina, and how you felt when you visited our country?
Well, I was honored to visit and certainly received very warmly and well by the country. And so I will always appreciate the people of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I remember driving to Tuzla and seeing Martin Luther King Street and the bust of Dad in front of City Hall. And all my life, I've heard my mother and others talk about monuments that are erected in honor of Dad. But to actually physically be there and to be with the citizens of Bosnia Herzegovina and to be with the citizens of the city of Tuzla was quite a remarkable experience. It's a great honor, and I was just truly honored and enamored to be in that environment. And I thanked the mayor and the city representatives, and I certainly look forward to coming back again to that wonderful country, to your wonderful country, I should say.
I hope so, that you will come and that we will have a chance for another interview in person, not this far away. But let me conclude this interview with this. Your late father said in his speech, "I have a dream." He said this, and I'm asking you this as his son and as his successor and as someone who's fighting today and whose successor will continue a fight. He says this: "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but the content of their character. I have a dream. I have a dream that one day in Alabama, with its vicious racist, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day, right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with the little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers." This is your father in front of Lincoln Memorial, speaking to the nation. How do you see the future of the United States, but not only the future of the United States, but the future of the world, through the words of your late father, Dr. King? And what if we can imagine he would tell us in this situation to do as we are moving forward from this situation?
So I would have to say that vision that he shared in 1963 on August 28th, that we know of, the speech being named, "I Have a Dream," parts of the dream have become real. And the way I characterize it is, when you look at individual wealth, individuals have made a lot. I mean, they're business people, they're entertainers, they're athletes, doing very well from a wealth perspective. However, the masses of people, most Black people, are not doing as well as they should be able to. When you look at the average wealth of Americans is somewhere around 100, prior to this pandemic, it was around $140,000 for the average white family. The average wealth for Black families is somewhere around $35,000 to $40,000. So white wealth is tremendously more, far more than Black wealth. And this is, 50 years. So we got to close that gap. We got to find a way to close that gap, the financial gap. Racism in America is at an all-time high. That does not mean that the majority of people are racist. That means that the racists that exist are able to stand on a platform and exhibit their racism. In the past, that was not something that people would do. They were not willing to do it. Unfortunately, the rhetoric that the president speaks makes those racists feel comfortable as opposed to them feeling uncomfortable and working toward change. So we've got to address that. My dad talked about eradicating triple evils, and he defined those evils as poverty, the evil of poverty, the evil of racism, and he said the evil of militarism. I've changed militarism to violence. We've got to get rid of poverty or reduce poverty, racism, and violence in our society. We will have a much better society when that happens. And that is what I am working to foster throughout our nation and world, the eradication of poverty, racism, and violence. It only takes a few good women and men to bring about change. And I do believe that someday, Dad's dream will become real for all humankind. It must become real. Dad said we must learn nonviolence or we may face non-existence. We won't face non-existence, so we must, as humankind, learn nonviolence.
Mr. King, thank you so very much. You couldn't find a better closing for this interview than the words of your late father, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Thank you once again. It was my real pleasure. And I hope that we will have a chance to speak again, but on some more happier and more positive occasion. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Thank you.